Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. In a multi-billion-dollar industry where people try to reach out to find the best resolve for their weight, it seems almost difficult that each and every day we reach out as we turn on the television, flip open the pages of a magazine, or read a particular news article in a book, that we try to find ourselves ways to lose weight. Each fad promises something at the end of the rainbow, but we find ourselves distressed and in despair as we realize that we're not achieving our goals. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is someone who has spent more than 30 years with this particular issue. She has written more than 5 books, including the Food and Feelings Workbook and Starting Monday. Her newest book is Outsmart Overeating. It's Boost Your Life Skills and Find Your Food Problems. And I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Karen Koenig. Karen, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Thank you for inviting me to be on the show.
This is an interesting approach that you outline here in your book, Outsmart Overeating, where you talk about life skills. That wouldn't be something people would typically think about. And as a matter of fact, as I was reading through it, you don't even really talk about diet all that much. As I was reading through this is a pretty interesting approach compared to what's out there.
Well, my premise is, what if your eating problems aren't really about food? Or what if your food problems aren't really about eating? What if they're about doing better with the rest of your life so you have more pleasure and less stress and are more likely to turn to, less likely to turn to food? So it's a twofer. You get a better life and you get a better relationship with food.
You have to love that, don't you? How did you get started with all this as far as interest?
I had my own eating problems for the first half of my life. I'll be 68. So I was what I consider a world-class binger, a chronic dieter. My weight yo-yoed. My self-esteem was low. And then I read a book that said you can learn to stop dieting and binging and eat according to appetite. And I said, hey, I'm game. And I learned how to do that. And I've been practicing it ever since. And I'm at a comfortable weight and very comfortable with food.
Mm-hmm. Now, what's really impressive is that you talk about how eating can be an emotional roller coaster, that we tend to eat to relieve anxiety a lot of times. Tell us about that.
Well, anxiety is a funny emotion. It means we have a perceived threat to self. But because we evolved to be creatures that have fear and anxiety, and we did that at a time when we really needed to be fearful, like predators and acts of nature, and we learned that we had to have fear to survive. It's not as useful now because there's not really that many things to be scared of. I mean, does it really matter? You know, we get anxious. I know sometimes I do. I'm late for a movie. Well, it's not really a threat to my life. So anxiety also comes from our memories of things that made us anxious before. So the memory gets triggered and we think, oh, I need to be anxious. I'll give you a very brief example. If you get bitten by a dog, as a child, you may be afraid of dogs. You walk by a house, you're 25 years old, hear barking, and look, and the first thing is anxiety or fear, but then you see dog is wagging its tail on a chain behind a fence. So you use the other part of your brain to say, I don't really need to be anxious. So just a little bit different way to look at anxiety, a complicated subject.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's interesting, too, because you can find yourself in any city driving down, particularly busy boulevards or streets, and it seems that every other block there's a fast food restaurant. And it's pretty interesting because they make it so available that all you do is drive through to get what you want. And you kind of wonder how often when a person pulls into a place like that they're really eating because they're hungry or they're eating because they just want to find themselves trying to calm down.
I wonder about that myself, and it's up to each of us to say, am I hungry? That's really the first question. Just because we have an urge to eat doesn't mean that we need to move toward food. Because if the answer to am I hungry or not hungry enough to eat is no, then the next question becomes, what is it that I really want? And the sad thing, and the reason I wrote my book, is because every time we go to food and eat, when we're not hungry, we're really missing a chance to make our life better in another way.
Now, you talk about the idea of quick fixes. Boy, do we see a whole lot of those out there, don't we? You know, you reach out and there's a new herb that promises that you'll knock off 5 to 10 pounds in a week, or there's a set of CDs where you can just sweat away the fat, and they all seem like easy fixes, but the truth is, this is just a little bit more complicated than what a lot of these things tend to promise, isn't it?
Yes. In fact, what eating disorder therapists know, and we've known since the 80s, is that diets are the gateway behaviors to things like binge eating, chronic dieting, restriction, bulimia, anorexia, that the worst thing people can do, according to science, is to diet, because diets keep us obsessed about food. They cause us to feel deprived, and then that creates rebound eating. Diets restrict calories, and our bodies say, oh, goodness, no, better slow down the old metabolism because we don't want to starve. And they create an artificial reliance on something outside the body when, hey, humans have been around for about 200,000 years, Homo sapiens. We really do have a mechanism called appetite that has served us very well to survive.
Mm-hmm. Now, in your book, you outline that it is about life skills and developing basic life skills and being able to get to a point where you can strengthen them enough to manage life well. And it was really interesting to take a look at that, because you realize that perhaps as somebody out there who's eating, binging, doing those things where they're gaining weight, well, you could see how they wouldn't be successful trying to follow a weight loss protocol, because if you don't have a particular life skill, as some of the ones that you have outlined in your book have, then you're going to find that it just isn't going to work. You know, so you can see why quick fixes and that promise out there becomes so elusive. Let's talk about the life skills that you outline in your book and why those are so important to strengthen as well as know what they are in the first place and being able to achieve what you're trying to when it comes to your weight loss goals.
Well, the first one, and I put it in the book first purposely, is for wellness and physical care. That when you love something, you take care of it, whether it's a car or your child or your pet or your house. And we are given one body, and there's really no reason, unless we were taught otherwise, to not treat our bodies skillfully and take good care of them, which means prevention. It means attention to conditions that might be harming us, whether they're in the environment or illnesses. So the first skill, and it really is one, is to know how to take care of your body well. And that even means things like taking an umbrella, wearing the appropriate clothing for the weather. So that's the first skill. Another skill that we don't often hear talked about is self-regulation, and that's a sort of clinical term. But what I find is people who have eating problems, it's a dysregulation of appetite, and that they also don't know what's enough in many areas of life. I call it, I tease clients that it's an enough disorder. And so they may go overboard in many things and underdo in many other things and really not have that felt sense of what is enough. So they yo-yo from one extreme to another. When life is in better balance, we have less stress. Living consciously. The past is done. It's not a thing. The past is time is over, and the future hasn't happened. So all we have is the present. And it's not just a question of living mindfully and eating mindfully, but living consciously, not reacting, knowing why we make decisions. So those are some of the life skills, but they're all equally important.
You know, it's interesting as you were talking about that, I was reminded of an acquaintance that was talking about how sometimes people become addicted because food had became something that was a reward for behavior. And how often have we actually experienced that growing up? You know, your parents saying, "Hey, great job, let's go get you an ice cream." You know, and it's interesting how that can actually create problems down the road, isn't it?
It's true, and do you know that my dentist's office has chocolate chip cookies at the payment window on the way out?
You gotta love that, or the popsicle from the the lollipop from the pediatrician when you take your kids to the doctor.
Yes, and used in moderation, food is a pleasure. I mean, we use it at celebrations, and it's fine to occasionally say, wow, I had a hard day. I think I'll have some ice cream, or I'll go out for a really enjoyable dinner. It's a question of, again, the regulation. How often do you do it? If you only have one way to reward yourself, and it's a way that is not truly a reward because it hurts you, then there's something wrong. So if food is one type of reward among many, that's fine. But it's not good when it's the only egg in the basket.
Mm-hmm. Now, in your life skills, because you've developed these over 30 years, you work with countless people, and how often have you find them lacking, or even to the point they weren't even knowing about what these life skills were?
Well, I think, excuse me, other than maybe clinically, we don't really talk about life skills. We talk about parenting skills, job skills, but the World Health Organization is the one that developed the concept and disseminated the concept that we do need skills to live life effectively. And none of us got all of them because our parents had imperfect skills because they learned them from imperfect parents and back and back. So everybody is learning life skills. And when I tell clients that, they relax a little because they tend to feel defective to begin with. Like, what's wrong with me? I can't get eating right. And they may have other issues. So I tell them I'm still practicing and learning life skills. It is a different way of looking things. And what I like about this concept is it does not only give you a better life, but it takes the pressure off the whole food and weight thing.
Mm-hmm. I know it gets pretty rough when you're out there trying to achieve a particular goal of just feeling good. And, most people aesthetically approach dieting rather than approaching it for the reason of just feeling good, don't they?
Well, this culture, which is the most fat-phobic, thin-obsessed culture in the history of time, which is very frightening, but this culture looks at weight as the reason to eat differently. And research tells us that that is the least successful strategy, that people who want to get healthier do better losing weight and keeping it off and changing their eating. But directly focusing on weight is just about the worst thing people can do. And, I tell them pretty much at the beginning of working with them, get rid of the scale. And it's true. I mean, what happens? We jump on the scale, the number's low, and we say, oh, great, I can eat more today. Or we jump on the scale, and the number's higher than we want, and we say, uh-oh, better cut back today. I mean, it's all external. It's all artificial when we have perfectly good mechanisms to decide how to eat. My first book, The Rules of Normal Eating, talks about the rules. Eat when you're hungry. Make choices that you enjoy, not just about good or bad. Eat mindfully, slowly, towards enjoyment. Stop when you're full or satisfied. So if we practice those, we'd be home free.
Yeah, it's just so interesting when we think about, for instance, in America, that we consider food to be fuel. It isn't something to be enjoyed or relished or even shared a lot of times. And I think that if we kind of change that, much like what the Europeans, specifically French and Italians, how they eat to enjoy life, so to speak. You don't see them running around chasing diets, trying to lose weight and try to aesthetically be appealing. And you kind of think, how does a person step out of that and realize, I'm kind of caught in that wheel, and how do I change that and really exercise my muscle, so to speak, so that I can actually manage to do and to achieve the kind of goal that I'm looking for?
Well, again, the problem in this country, well, there are a couple. First of all, there's this whole Puritan work ethic. Our country is based a lot on shame. There's not a lot of tolerance for size diversity. We have the idea that if we just try hard enough, we can do it, and moreover, we can probably do it alone. And we have some very funny ideas about life. And, as you say, we don't think of food as pleasure or even learning to eat different as moving towards pleasure. Our goal is to lose weight, not to have a better relationship with food. So some of it is just built into the American culture. But people can change all the time. They can decide they're just fed up with doing it this way, and they do want to build muscle in other areas of their lives. And by doing that, it changes our brains when we do things differently, and then we really have a better life.
Mm-hmm. I know that one of the most commonly asked questions that you talk about in your book is people ask you, how long is this going to take? Are you in a hurry? This is a lifetime here we're talking about.
Yeah, right. And what I say to them is, I understand you want it yesterday, and that everyone is taking baby steps, even if it doesn't look like that. There are no other kinds of steps to take except baby steps. And the time is going to pass anyway, and it's going to change your life to have a better relationship with food. So pay attention to what you're doing and not the end goal. And very often, one of the problems is the fact that people are impatient. Mm-hmm. And I'll say to them, look, when you're a freshman in college, you don't expect to know what you know on graduation day. You don't say, well, I only want to do this for a week, so can I have my graduation after a week? You go along with the process because it takes time to learn and change your brain. And so we talk a lot about that urge for the quick fix, but it's the same thing as the urge for the quick fix when you're, let's say, upset. So it's a personality trait that with practice can become more patient and accepting of what's going on in the moment.
Now, there's one thing that's pretty interesting is, and I kind of wonder about this, that people who tend to overeat and be overweight don't really, and this is just my observation, but they don't tend to really prepare food or get involved with that process in as much as just finding out, is this going to be enough? I find it astounding. I remember many years ago as I worked in the restaurant industry serving people, is that I worked at a place that, first of all, had dinner coupons. Come on in for, the $9.99 dinner special. And it was astounding how often I would hear the question, do you think that this will be enough? I mean, they were coming in as though they were starving to death. And I'm thinking, yeah, not only is this more than enough, and then, of course, there was the free bread that came with the meal. Could I get another basket of bread? Sometimes you'd be at a table and 3 or 4 baskets of bread. And they were eating just mainly so that they could feel full. And I thought to myself, that's not very enjoyable. When it comes to actually preparing and eating a meal, it should be pleasurable. You should take your time, instead of worrying about, is this going to be enough?
Well, as you say it, we can hear that this is an emotional issue. It's not an appetite-related issue. It really has nothing to do with food. It's coming from what's called a deprivation mentality. And it's important for people to look at it and say, is this how I view life? That I never get enough, that it's not fair, that I better grab it while I can. A better way to look at it, if there's a big portion, is to say, boy, I don't have to eat it all now. I can make 2 meals out of it, or 3. So if you look at life as abundance, I can have this food whenever I want. So I don't have to eat it all, and I don't have to gobble it down. The other thing is when people are gobbling down food, it really doesn't register in their brain. They've done, scientists done experiments, and we have to eat slowly and let the food sit on our tongue in order for taste buds to register that we've eaten. So that's why you see people who eat a huge meal and then they walk around and they're hungry after, because the brain really hasn't taken it in. Our eating in this country needs a complete overhaul, from portion size to what the food industry pushes, to our reliance on diets, and to looking at it as just a body problem as opposed to what I would call a mind-body problem.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting to think that when we leave the house and we go out about our day, how often we see messages and we tend to feel anxiety and emotional roller coasters that surround us. And you can see where eating becomes that emotional blanket. It's that way to soothe and calm us down. And I would think, because you talk about this life skill, which is being able to basically manage your emotions, that if we could learn to do this, that would be a really big step in being able to control and being empowered, actually, more than anything, is what you talk about, to being able to make choices in the moment as to, do I need to reach out for that double cheeseburger and the extra large fries, or can I kind of go buy this, maybe just pick up some nice, a nice cup of ice water, for instance, or juice. And I remember many years ago when I was talking with a friend of mine, and I said, I tended to like to exercise in the morning, just something, nice and light, and then I would eat breakfast. And she suggested, well, it's better if you eat first. And I said, well, no, actually, the reason I do that is I feel more empowered when I go to make that choice about what I want to have for breakfast, and I would tend to reach for healthier things. And she sat there for a moment and thought, that's kind of hard to argue with.
Well, and I would support your choice of your schedule by saying this is what works for your body.
Right.
We are not one size fits all. And for some people, they like to eat breakfast. For some people, they're not hungry till maybe 11 o'clock. Maybe they have a late dinner. So I think what you did by listening to your body was really important. And the emotional piece, I did write my second book is the Food and Feelings Workbook, which goes through 7 emotions that mindless eaters, emotional compulsive eaters have difficulty with. And it talks about what the purpose of emotions is, which is to guide us through life, the same as our senses do. They're not just there to drive us crazy. And why we fear emotions, how we learn about emotions, and then it goes through 7 specific emotions, one of which is anxiety, guilt, confusion, and why we eat and how we can not eat but experience them. Because emotions are value neutral. They're like colors on a palette or notes on a scale. They just are. They're information about your world. So if you look at them that way, then you start to want to experience them. And there are much better ways to cope with emotions or stress or distress than eating, which just usually brings us down and causes disappointment, depression, self-hate, remorse, guilt, a whole other set of emotions.
And I would encourage the listeners as they go through your book, Outsmarting Overeating, is that they would become to realize that this actually becomes easier than counting calories, or trying to stick rigidly to a particular diet, for instance, something with no carbs. And it's just amazing how frustrated people can get when they feel that they have to stick to a particular regimen, rather than just allowing themselves time for self-discovery, to realize, why do I make the choices that I make, and are they healthy, and could I do something better for myself, rather than following what somebody else suggests to do. And that's, I think, what people will find in your book that's definitely more empowering than a lot of the diet books that you tend to see out there.
Oh, for sure. I mean, what diet books basically tell you is you have no clue how to feed and take care of yourself.
Exactly.
And so don't even try, because you're going to fail. And then what happens is people do fail. They lose weight, regain it, lose it, regain it. And so they fail, and believing that they can't rely on their own appetite, they then have to find another diet and another diet and another diet. And it really is sad. A wonderful book to read on this subject is called Health at Every Size by Linda Bacon, who's a researcher in the field. And she just came out with a new book called Body Respect. And she talks about, science, study after study after study, why diets don't work, what does work to reconnect with appetite. And it's a wonderful read. It's a real eye-opener. And I encourage anybody who thinks they might want to start another diet to read it and read about all the dangers of what is going to happen, not the least of which is they're going to fail, because statistics tell us that about 95% of people who diet regain the weight, and 90% regain more than they originally lost. And I will remind your audience that weight is regained not in the form of muscle, but in the form of fat. Mm-hmm. So the last thing we want to do is diet, and learning to eat normally is really a sort of exciting adventure. Because when you can eat normally, food just doesn't plague you anymore. You're not obsessing and thinking about food and weight all day long. You have more energy for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm. I would also encourage people, too, to learn how to cook to a point where it's a creative process, where you really enjoy it. And I think that can really empower people as well. Would you agree?
I think for some people that is true. I think other people, for instance, like myself, I had a mother that wasn't crazy about cooking. And, she fed the family very well. And, I can cook, but for myself, I like plain food. And at this point of my life, I am doing so many other interesting things that food to me, I go out to dinner and then I look for a lot of pleasure. But food for me is, let me get enough healthy nutrients into my body so I can go on to other things that I really enjoy. So for some people, cooking is a whole new world, and they love it, and it really helps them eat better. And for other people, it's just a pressure to do, one more thing to do. Right. So I say, know yourself. Clearly, if it helped you, continue to do it. If it doesn't help you, find ways to eat plain and yet healthy.
The book is Outsmarting Overeating. Our guest today, Karen Koenig. Is there a website people can go and find out more about your work?
Yes. It's KarenRKoenig.com. And I'll also mention that I moderate a Food and Feelings message board on Yahoo, and there's a link to that. It's called the Food and Feelings Message Board. And I blog twice weekly, and there's a link to my blogs, and people can subscribe and just get them right coming to their inbox. My website has podcasts and lots of interesting information. I also have a Facebook fan page, that where I post articles, and people can talk about their issues and their successes with eating and weight.
Very good. Karen, thank you so much for joining us on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Thank you. My pleasure.
We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. You can be sure to visit us at our website at beyond50radio.com. We'll have a link there for you where you can find out more about how to outsmart overeating. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.